Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. This is the Darklight Emissary, and I first off hope you are having a great start to your new year. We are in 2024, which is a bit hard to believe sometimes. It's always weird to hit another year in this future of ours. Another year closer to our 40K one day. Hopefully nothing like the one we talk about on this channel, but I digress. This video is going to be about Psykers. Because Psykers are probably one of the most, if not the most important class of individual in 40K in a lot of ways, and I haven't really talked about them much other than when they are covered under certain factions like the Thousand Suns Legion of Space Marines. But Psykers are kind of what the entire setting in some ways revolves around, whether we like it or not. And so I wanted to briefly go over Psykers and why they are so important to the setting. To keep this video a little bit shorter, I'm not going to dive into every type of Psyker there is, because most of the species in the galaxy, with precious few exceptions, have Psykers amongst them, and how they are utilized or used in different species, in different xenospecies, is different for each of the species. So we're going to focus mostly on how they affect humanity and humans, because that is what the setting for the most part focuses on, is the Imperium of Man and the Psykers within its empire. And so to kind of just start off, a Psyker is at its basic level a user of energy from the warp. They have a stronger connection. Most humans have a connection to the warp. It's very small. You just have a presence there in the warp, like a small dot, on a piece of paper. And, you put enough dots together and humanity is visible in the warp. But most humans do not ever manifest any sort of power from the warp, but Psykers do. And Psykers range wildly from very basic, powers like reading a mind, telekinetically being able to move an object, all the way up to such power that it's not really measurable. So we're going to go briefly through the levels that the Imperium designates Psykers at, and talk a bit about them here. So there's 6 main categories for Psykers. At the very bottom, we have what's known as Epsilon grade. This would be probably like your local psychic fortune teller. Like, let's say you belong to a planet in the Imperium that has a fortune teller that uses the Emperor's Tarot cards to read your future. They might very well be a Psyker at this very basic level, to where they can kind of glean a future through the warp, and they use that power to just ply a trade in a town. And let's say it's a backwater world, so they might eventually be found by the Inquisition in their black ships, which go out to find Psykers and bring them in, because any unchecked Psyker is a danger to everyone. But these ones might go unnoticed or unreported by the local populace if they perform something useful like this to the local populace, until an audit basically of the area gets done by the greater apparatus of the Imperium, and they're found out. But that's your basic Epsilon grade. Now, the next 3 categories are Beta, Gamma, and Delta, and that's going from the most powerful labeling down to the lowest, which is Delta. This range can kind of go, again, it's not exactly quantified, but beyond that lowest Epsilon level, you've got the Beta, Gamma, and Delta, and this encompasses within it still on that lower level, like, your local witch or something like that, but also starting to bring it up to that alpha level, which alpha and alpha plus we'll talk about, but alpha is very powerful and alpha plus is basically unmeasurable. So beta is like the most powerful that you would most commonly see, and these are, along with the gamma, I would say, are what the Imperium uses as sanctioned Psykers. So these Psykers are the ones that are usually discovered and vetted by the Inquisition and their black ships, and they are trained to use their powers so that they are not a danger to themselves or to the Imperium. And because the biggest double-bladed thing about Psykers is that not only are unsanctioned Psykers dangerous for just being able to use their powers willy-nilly and can kill, their fellow citizens and other people, but the biggest risk with being a Psyker is that you are like a beacon in the warp. You are like a lighthouse, and the things you're drawing to your harbor are not friendly ships. They're, the beings of the warp, demons, creatures of the warp, things that desire to eat the Psyker, basically, or use it as a portal to get into real space, like, demons of the 4 Chaos Gods. So a untrained Psyker could unwittingly basically turn themselves into a portal for demons. They could become possessed by demons. They could become a demon themselves. All kinds of nightmarish things have happened with Psykers. In fact, the biggest thing that humanity learned was during Old Night, and Old Night, it's called that because it was a very scary time, and it was mostly because that was when the Psyker gene expanded rapidly, and many worlds fell to, nightmarish demon incursions caused by Psykers that were unsanctioned and uncontrollable in their powers. And this all being said, Psykers still, while being very important to the setting, I would say are actually somewhat uncommon. They're common enough that they're used in certain capacities, like you have astropaths, which are used to convey messages across the galaxy to other areas. That's the only way to get reliable communication for faster than light travel, is by using the astropaths. Or you have navigators, which are a type of Psyker ability that only really is useful for navigating in the warp itself with their third eye. Now, navigators are not Psykers in the normal sense. I would recommend reading more about them, but I'm kind of considering them Psykers a little bit just because they can see into the warp so clearly and are obviously connected to the warp in a very specific way. So one of the other distinct ways that Psykers are classified is what type of abilities they do have. And they can have a variety of abilities or be very specialized in one ability. And this can range from telepathic type abilities to pyro type abilities like fire, lightning abilities. Some of the elemental type abilities are caused by their Psyker power, and they will usually be drawn to one of these specific disciplines over the others just naturally, or several of them at the same time. But it's highly uncommon to have have a Psyker that is a master of all of the Psyker ability potential options, unless we are talking about the top tier ones. And so when we get to beta and alpha level Psykers, these are the ones that are often used by the Imperium in higher ranking positions, such as Space Marine Librarians, which are, your Space Marine specific Psykers. Inquisitors are often Psykers. Despite them also hunting Psykers, they are often used to hunt down their unsanctioned brethren, to either bring them in as fellow companions later, or, be used by the Imperium for its other uses for Psykers. And when we get to alpha level, a lot of alpha level are used specifically for this type of purpose. I would say a lot of beta and alpha are going to be your Inquisitors, your Librarians, people of high ability and power, and then that's where things start varying a bit more wildly in their impact on the world around them. Some of the most powerful Psykers in the Imperium are Space Marine Librarians, such as Mephiston and Tigurius. These are both the chief librarians of the Blood Angels and Ultramarines chapters, specifically, and how their warp abilities manifest for each of them tends to be a bit different. Tigurius is more of a telepathic type of, although he can use other powers, he's mostly a specialist in seeing the future type of thing, whereas Mephiston is more of a powerhouse of very physical power, although they both have that ability, because when you're at like the alpha and probably high beta level, you typically have a more passive psychic ability, like reading the future, and also ability to raw power disciplines like fire and lightning type magics from the warp. And then you have specialist groups like the Grey Knights chapter of Space Marines, which I imagine they are only taking alpha level psychers into their potential pool candidate, because Grey Knights need to be not only powerful in psychic use, but also just have the ability to use a lot of abilities that psychers use, and then also have a character that makes them uncorruptible. And that's one of the main benefits to a Grey Knight, is that they are very close to the Emperor in the sense that they can call upon great amounts of psychic energy and not run the risk of corruption like the rest of the psychers that we talked about. Pretty much every other psyker has to be very careful on how much power they pull from the warp at any given time, because the warp is not their friend. They are basically tapping into something very temperamental, and it can and will either kill them outright, again, possess them, or corrupt them to the side of chaos, typically. And so it makes the Grey Knight super useful, because they ended up being like the closest thing to uncorruptible, like the Emperor and like the Adeptus Custodes. And the biggest downfall to the Custodes is that they were not psychers, so that even though they're superlative warriors, that does not allow them to be as useful as they could be, which is pretty much why the Grey Knights were created by Malcador the Sigillite, as kind of an answer to that pitfall in their ability to fight chaos that they either overlooked or didn't want to look into at the time. And so then we're going to get into the Alpha Plus level. So Alpha Plus psychers run the gamut. What I mean by that is, really, it's not a measurement. It's a labeling that says, past this point, we cannot measure the power of these psychers. They are beyond a measuring capacity. And these are typically rare. And often, if someone is labeled as a alpha or alpha plus psyker especially, they often do not have a lot of control over their power and self-destruct pretty quickly. There are a couple incidents of at least alpha level psychers that are basically go out wiping out entire regiments of soldiers and things like that before being brought down, destroying tanks and things like of that nature. There's legends that say that an alpha plus or alpha psyker can break a titan in half with their mind, although that has never been recorded as a specific incident, with the exception, I would say, of perhaps Magnus the Red, who is an alpha plus. But anyways, so when we go to alpha plus, again, this is not measurable, and we have several individuals that fall into this category. I'm going to focus on 4 for now, and there might be only 4 if I'm really thinking about it, but having not researched this super deeply, and this video not trying to be super exhaustive, I'm going to go into the 4 that I know of. And one of those will have to be Ahriman, the chief librarian of the Thousand Sons. He is most likely an alpha plus psyker. If not, he's at the very edge between alpha and alpha plus. Ahriman not only could see the future, but he had mastery over other disciplines as well, like pyro abilities, kinetic abilities. He basically was a master on a certain level for most disciplines that a psyker could have. And he specialized in a lot of sorcery type abilities, and still does to this day as a champion of Tzeentch, which has only, I think, increased his power, because Tzeentch is the source of like any sorcery type of power from psychers. And so he's probably at the lowest level for an alpha or alpha plus. But Ahriman is a juggernaut as far as psyker abilities go. A very powerful individual. His feats include being able to see the future to a great degree, pulling entire worlds into, chaos. He is capable of creating, just very powerful spell magic that just decimates entire worlds, basically. Like, he does that usually for some kind of specific end. It's not like Ahriman is just going around and willy-nilly destroying things. He often has a very specific reasoning for what he's doing. But anyway, he is a very dangerous and powerful individual as far as Psykers are concerned. Next, we are going to talk about Malcador the Sigillite. Malcador is most likely a Alpha Plus. He is possibly only second to the Emperor, although I would put Magnus the Red up there next to his father compared to Malcador. And so Malcador being so close to the Emperor, it makes sense that he would also share in a relationship of also being a very powerful Psyker like the Emperor is. Malcador, we don't often see his powers, but there are a couple of main things we do know about him. Number one is that the Imperium has, as part of its forces, an anti-Psyker force known as the Sisters of Silence. And if you've seen them or read about them, they are the opposite of a Psyker. They have no soul presence in the warp, which is known as the Pariah gene. This makes them usually able to shut down psychic power around them completely. They are used to hunt Psykers often because that power is so revolting to a Psyker's psyche, typically. But with Malcador, he often has around him a couple of Sisters of Silence, and they don't seem to bother him, which is interesting, because even regular humans tend to not like the presence of a Sister of Silence around them. Even their very small warp flame, their soul inside them, revolts against the soullessness of a Sister of Silence. And Malcador may feel some discomfort with them nearby, but he generates so much power within himself that it's more useful to have them around, almost as bodyguards for him against other Psykers and things, than to not have them around, which just kind of implies his power level to a degree, because plenty of Psykers would just have no power around them, and he can still manifest his powers typically with them nearby, which just speaks to a depthless level of power available to them. A couple of other feats known to Malcador are he was able to hide the entire moon of Titan in the warp for it to come out at a later date, prescribed by the parameters of the spell he wove. And so just, his ability to be able to hide an entire planetoid in the warp is an interesting power that is not often seen. And then one of the other things that I recall with him is he was able to basically nearly choke Horus to death. So basically use his power against one of the Primarchs to a great degree, and that was another time where we saw his power used. But often, Malcador keeps his powers close to himself, and we never really saw the absolute breadth of his power. The closest we saw to that was his ability to sit on the Golden Throne for any length of time, and even his power is not enough to sustain the throne perpetually, which kind of gives us a measure of his power. He is still very powerful, and he sat on that throne for far longer than anyone would have assumed, I would think. Before the books, The End and the Death, Part 1 and 2 came out, it's said that Malcador sat on the throne, but what the time amount was, we didn't know. But now we know it was for a pretty undetermined longer amount of time. The end of the siege with the Emperor trying to hunt down Horus and all that was a bit more drawn out than I think we expected. And all this time Malcador is sitting on the throne, being burned up and used up by it. He has a immense amount of power that he's channeling. They did have to supplement his power with Psykers being fed into it as well after a time, but for a time he sustained it on his own. And so Malcador is definitely up there for Alpha Plus Psykers, and we never really saw him ever in battle really, but his power was often unspoken but there. You just kind of could feel it when he was in scenes, basically. And so then we're going to get to Magnus the Red. So Magnus the Red is quite possibly the second most powerful Psyker ever created, other than the Emperor himself, at least as far as mankind is concerned. The Emperor seemingly created Magnus with the purpose of sitting the Golden Throne as a replacement for himself, because once sitting on the throne, whoever's sitting on there has to sustain its power, and it seemingly was going to be Magnus's job eventually to do that, to become humanity's Aegis, protector from the throne, basically. Probably trained by the Emperor himself to manage it and have it be supplemental to Magnus's power and not just a pull of his own power levels. But Magnus is, his power was often on great display in certain situations. Since he was a commander in the Great Crusade, we had the spectacle of his power level sometimes being on display. One of these examples is him bringing down a Eldar Titan, basically just this super tall construct on a world. Magnus used some kind of telekinetic type ability and broke its legs basically and collapsed it with his power. At one point, a group of space wolves, come up to the Thousand Suns and start kind of sassing them, as space wolves are wont to do. And Magnus froze them all basically in place. Even the battle standards and flags that were waving in the wind, all of them froze in place for a time. And then everything snapped back to reality, and the space wolves were kind of like, oh, whoa, we don't really like you doing this. We kind of actually hate you now, but we also know we're not going to mess with that kind of power. So Magnus was kind of giving them a taste of that. And possibly the most powerful blatant display of magic for Magnus was during the Siege of Terra. There is a point where Magnus is trying to breach the walls of the palace to get into the palace, and he is able to pick up a gigantic moving fortress type vehicle. This thing is just a gigantic crawler basically, probably several football fields across, just this massive vehicle. And Magnus picks it up and throws it at the wall, at one of the palace walls of the Imperial Palace, and just blasts a giant hole through it, because the explosion from the vehicle itself, combined with the psychic might that Magnus is wielding at that point, just completely obliterates through this wall. And that was probably one of the most powerful single moments of any psyker power that I've seen in the books, is him doing that. And then possibly most infamously of all with Magnus is his destruction of the Emperor's Webway project. With this, one of the main abilities Magnus had, and it seems like a lot of psychers don't want to risk doing what he was doing here because they probably didn't have the Emperor to train them, but Magnus was able to basically astrally project his soul through the warp and travel it, and basically look through the warp itself. And he often did not fear doing this, but him being able to do this is what initially drew Tzeentch's attention to him. And Tzeentch kind of course, hid his purpose from Magnus for a time. And Magnus would depict seeing Tzeentch as a giant continent moving soul in the warp. It looked like this entity that wasn't exactly sentient, wasn't exactly, thinking, but was this massive intelligence that was kind of he almost depicted it like a whale, swimming through water, something big, slow, powerful, but nothing that Magnus couldn't handle. But as we know from a bit later on, that certainly wasn't the case. But Magnus was able to astrally project himself, and using sorcery through his Space Marines, pushed himself through the warp in spirit form, and was able to find where the webway was connected inside the warp and break through it with the power that Tzeentch loaned him as well. So he had the power of a chaos god being channeled directly into him, along with his own power, and he broke an actual hole through the webway, which is super rare. The webway, it was built basically as a permanent physical channel through the warp. You can't just break into it. And often if like areas of the warp are in the webway, it's because a portal was left open. Like typically not even a chaos god can just break through the sidewall of the webway. But Magnus was so powerful, combining that with a chaos god, he was able to break through. And when he did this, he then broke through the portal leading underneath the Imperial Palace and basically permanently broke some of the mechanisms of the Golden Throne, which seemingly led to a runaway chain reaction, which caused the Emperor to have to sit on the throne permanently, or Terra would be consumed by demons. So that was the biggest feat that we saw Magnus do, I would say, and see a Psyker basically do ever in the setting for the most part, with the exception of the Emperor himself. Now, the Emperor is the most unclassifiable Psyker of all. He is a power level tier unto himself. What you can measure that as is not known. The Emperor is distinct as a Psyker. And what I mean by that is it's not just the raw power he can pull to himself. It's that he is not at risk of possession or corruption by chaos or by demons or anything in the warp by pulling that power to himself. That's what makes him exceptional compared to Magnus, compared to Malcador. Like any other Psyker, even on the Alpha Plus level, still has to be trained and know what not to pull from the warp or they can become corrupted. Magnus fell to corruption. Ahriman fell to corruption by chaos. A lot of Space Marine librarians tend to not die from using their powers, but they can also fall to corruption, which we witness sometimes. And the Emperor alone is able to seemingly not only pull unlimited power from the warp, but transmute that into a different form almost of warp energy, like a pure form, like a form that is Emperor specific. And this is why the forces of chaos specifically call the Emperor the anathema to them, because he makes the warp itself antithetical to chaos energy, basically. And the Emperor, most famously so far in the latest book, The End and the Death Part 2, we witnessed him pull so much warp power into himself that he started basically becoming a god of his own, which was known as the Dark King. And he's the only individual basically able to do this. He would have become some form of chaos on his own, but he wasn't going to become corrupted by chaos. There's a distinct difference here. He would have become a power unto himself in the warp. And it might have been its own version of corruption, but it's not like he's being corrupted by the chaos gods themselves. Like they would have been possibly consumed by his power as well and transmuted into this form of energy that he then projects back at them as this purified warp energy. And that's what makes the Emperor so powerful, is he is not at risk in a normal way compared to the rest of the Psykers that we've listed here. So to put it simply, if you're a quote-unquote normal Psyker, even up to an Alpha Plus level, you run the risk of being corrupted or enslaved by an Eldritch Horror in the warp. The Emperor is at risk of becoming an Eldritch Horror himself. A key distinction there. The Emperor is unusual in every way by any Psyker measurement. Whether by Xeno Psyker measurements or by human, the Emperor is a power level and level unto himself. He's probably not even Alpha Plus. He's probably his own Psyker measurement. But because there's no other Psykers at his level, there is no way of telling where his power ends or begins. That's what makes the Emperor such a pivotal part of the setting and why he's able to sit on the Golden Throne for 10,000 years and not dissipate, because he has an unlimited source of warp power he can channel through himself. And if anything, he can grow that power and become a god at will, basically. And it's not known whether or not he's trying to do that now that he's on the throne, or if the throne pulls too much power from him. to be fed back into the machinery to keep it running. It seems to me that the Emperor is also channeling that power into the Golden Throne to do more than just simply save Terra. It seems to have some more esoteric stuff that we could talk about in another video that are important to possibly foundations of like physical laws even for the universe or something ridiculous like that. And then one thing I want to add regarding the Golden Throne room itself, the throne room of the Imperium of Mankind on Terra, on Holy Terra. One thing to note, this is something from Dan Abnett himself in a Q&A he did a bit ago, but he made the distinct pointing out of that this is not a typical throne room that you would go in and there's the Emperor sitting on like a throne you could walk up to. It would be like walking into the internal workings of a star if you tried to walk into the Golden Throne, like into the room that it's in even. And to call that a room is a misnomer. It's like a gigantic platform with the apparatus that is the throne on top of it, and the Emperor basically burning with the fire of 10 million suns worth of psychic energy burning off of him constantly. And the custodies that are stationed closest to the throne, often when they're done with that tour of duty, their Armorite armor, which is gold by normal standards, is scorched completely black by their proximity to the Emperor. So I just wanted to bring that up to emphasize further the point that the Emperor is a power unto himself, that even on the throne, seemingly mortally wounded and using the throne to keep himself alive, he is also keeping the throne running as well. Like, his power is that powerful. The throne itself is seemingly failing, but that's not to any fault of the Emperor's power. If anything, it could be said it's possible that the Emperor's power is just that much more powerful than the throne's and could be actually aiding in its eventual failure. But I imagine that some of those failures are caused all the way back from Magnus the Red's incursion into the Imperial Palace dungeon there and breaking archaic tech that couldn't be replicated again to stabilize the throne again. But anyway, I just want to bring this up. Like, you cannot just walk into the throne room. Robot Gullman, when he walked in, expressed that it was like hard to be in there. Like, you just can't just walk into the throne room. Like, I think Dan Abnett has said that, if you're a normal person trying to go in there, you're probably just going to get like ripped to pieces by the forces in there. You're not going to see the Emperor. You'll see nuclear fire. You'll see basically a reactor in any sense of the term. So, but anyway, the Emperor, most powerful psyker of them all, at his own level, and it's important to note here that beings like the Emperor can hide themselves too. They can change how they look. They can change how others perceive them. For a long time, the Emperor hid himself amongst the human population. No one knew who the Emperor was for a long time. A few long-term companions did, and they knew he was different from even them. But the Emperor hid his power and was able to hide it. And so the reason I bring that up is because if there are any beings at all close to the level of the Emperor in power, and they have the same kind of control as the Emperor, it's very possible they just keep themselves hidden from the rest of humanity because, A, they're a threat to humans automatically. The Imperium would see them as that. And B, they all often kind of are following their own paths and desires at that kind of power level. And, they only wish to be seen when they want to be seen, basically. Most famously with the Emperor for this type of thing is the Emperor was present at a meeting that Malcador the Sigillite was present at, along with the heads of all the assassin houses of the Emperor, of the Imperium. And, so all these people are heads of, clandestine wings of the Imperium. And Rogal Dorn is present as well, Primarch of the Imperial Fists. And unbeknownst to all of them, probably even including Malcador sitting there, the Emperor was also in the room as a dark shadow just in the corner. And it explicitly talks about how when the Emperor reveals himself to be in the room, Dorn is like taken aback by this because he looked at that shadow and just kind of dismissed it. And it seems like there was a mix of just being able to hide himself and also project from that shadow, like the mind suggestion of, this is nothing over here, which I just find very interesting. So if there are powerful psykers close to the Emperor in power out there, they are able to hide that power. And I should note that Magnus Ared was able to do this too. Shortly after breaking the wall at the Imperial Palace, he changed himself to just look like a regular space marine in his legion. Or not in his legion, in the Blood Angels Legion. And he was able to hide himself in that way. No one perceived him as they walked through some refugees in the city as a Primarch, or what his power level was. So, at that level of power, not only are you so powerful you're able to do feats of power that no one else can, but your power level is distinct enough to shape an entire species, as well as hide from that species as well if you want to. Like, the Emperor's psychic might seemingly has an effect on his intellect and his ability to manipulate and get himself into the power level he was at politically as well. And for a time, though, it was used to hide him as well, which is an important thing. We often look at the Emperor and other powerful psykers for what they're able to do in a very bombastic and crazy way, but we don't think about the more subtle effects sometimes they can have, which is that they can hide amongst the population and simply observe if they want to as well. And for many psykers at this level, they are not going to die of old age either, whether the psychic power itself is able to manipulate their biology to where they just won't age, or in the case of the Emperor, you're a perpetual, which means you don't age to begin with and don't die normally to begin with at all. So just some important knowledge there. I personally believe that there are psykers out there that might not be at the Emperor's level, but are so powerful that they know they're that powerful, they have control over their abilities, and they simply hide amongst the population and use their power more subtly for their own personal powers and like raising themselves up in societies without being caught out as a psyker, because they would know, if they're in the Imperium especially, that it would call down the Inquisition and other psykers and powers to challenge them if they were to ever reveal themselves. So anyway, I don't want to make this video super long, so I'm going to probably end it here, but this is just a bit about each psyker level and the importance of psykers in the setting. They are the most powerful beings in the setting, and often the setting revolves around what they are doing or choosing not to do. We got beings like the Emperor that are central to the entire setting, and he's central because he's a psyker of unfathomable ability and power, and what he chooses to do or not do is what the universe itself kind of pivots on, which is makes this class of being in Warhammer possibly the most important class, unless we want to start talking about the Catan and physical only beings, but again, for a different video. So anyway, if you like this video, please leave a like and subscribe. We are getting closer to 1,000 subscribers. We are close to 750 right now. Thank you so much for all of you that have chosen to subscribe over the last week. The last video went very well. I was kind of shocked for this small channel to see nearly 4,000 views so far on that video. That video will be at the end of this video if you want to check it out. It's a cool video about mysterious worlds in one of the most unexplored parts of space. Has some really fun little bits of lore there. And I encourage you to check out the rest of the channel. There's a lot of videos on this channel for basics on each of the legions, for the Space Marines, and some other basic stuff if you're just getting started in Warhammer. So I hope you have a great new year. I'm going to look to keep consistent with the videos now and try to get out a few each week for you. And I hope you have a great day or night wherever you are. Thank you very much, and I'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.